Hey, Eileen.
Hey, you were the comment thing. I can't even get my camera to work. I'm just gonna have to make you. I'm not gonna be able to introduce you because the new password wouldn't work either. I'm gonna let everyone out of the waiting room. I can do that,
Okay.
and then I'm gonna just make you. Bring it back to you when. Oh, you're out of here. Okay. When I'm gonna make you the co-host.
Okay.
I can get everyone out of the
Waiting room.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Eileen.
You want to co-host the seated? Yes. And then I'm gonna release everyone from the waiting room, and you're just gonna have to start it. I'm sorry.
It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. I got it, and we'll get it done. We'll get through this together. No worries. Do you want me to like keep your like on the phone, or can you hear? Can you hear it?
I can hear you only through the phone, so now I'm admitting everyone, so everyone's gonna be able to hear you speak. Wait, let me just make sure you're not. Yeah. So I'm just gonna keep admitting everyone, and then
Okay, that sounds good. All right, thanks. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Give thumbs up. Awesome. Hi, I was just on the phone with Eileen. She is having massive technical difficulties, so we appreciate everyone's patience. I am going to be kicking this off for us tonight as her Zoom is malfunctioning. But thank you everyone for hanging in. I know we're running a little behind. I am Gwenn Nolan. I am going to admit anyone. The owner of Mother Compost. We are a composting service operating in Haverford Township and along the main line. And we have partnered with Haverford Township, and Joy Baxter, who I see on here, has been spearheading a program, yay, to help get Haverford Township denizens access to composting. There are bins available at a discounted price if after this class you are interested. We have developed a quiz just to help people retain the information. And you can contact Joy or the Have Compost email. Joy, I don't know if you want to say anything or.
Sure. Actually, for the people attending tonight, they don't actually have to take the quiz. So, but for the quiz that Gwenn mentioned, it's for people who might not be able to attend tonight, who would be getting asynchronous training, just to make sure they actually did something or know it in the end. And yeah, so right now the bins are available for $25. There's a sample in the crack, and you would, if you're interested in the bin, please email Have Compost, HAVCOPOST. No, well, I forgot the M, compost at gmail.com, and then I'll get you hooked up.
All right, fantastic. And that information is also in the presentation. Again, as Joy mentioned, this is recorded, so if you ever need to reference it, feel free. And we are, yes, we can add that to the chat. Since I'm going to be presenting, I'm not going to be able to field questions as we go. So Joy, if anyone has contact information, if you could pop it in the chat, that's great. Otherwise, I will certainly answer any questions I see there at the end of our presentation today. If you need me during the presentation, just raise your hand so that you pop up on my screen, and I'm happy to answer and make this as interactive as we want to get at 7 on a Wednesday. But I am excited to see all your faces, and I'm going to just take over control of the screen and we'll go from there. So let me present. And sorry, we're all the way at the back. Sorry, I was reviewing. But you can see we got a ton of good stuff here for you tonight. Get excited. So this presentation is going to be about composting at home. We're just talking about backyard composting tonight. We're unfortunately not going to get into vermicomposting or bokashi or all these other kind of cool indoor composting options. But There are other options if backyard composting is not for you. I am the compost nerd, or I'm uncomfortable with the term expert, but I love composting. I started Mother Compost in 2018. So we do collections for people that don't have space or time. And we collect materials and take them to Linville Orchards, where they're turned into compost, and deliver a portion of that back to our subscribers each and every spring. Very passionate. I got into this really because I was cooking a lot. I have 3 kids, creating a lot of waste at home, and couldn't believe how much food I was throwing away. So got into composting. And truthfully, I was having a hard time turning materials into finished compost that could be used in the garden. I also have issues. I'm kind of a terrible gardener, so we had a lot of problems. And part of me said, well, if it requires everyone to do this, then the majority of people are never going to do it, and composting will never take off. And it really should, because of the amount of waste we generate here in the US today. The most recent data is 2018, which is 292.4 million tons generated in 2018. So tons, and about 22% of that is food waste, for just food. Which is the largest single category we send to landfills each year. So if we can just take that piece of the pie and redirect it to composting, it can have a huge impact. So why composting and what is it? Just to give you an idea of what we'll go through tonight. Getting started, if you're really new to this and you don't have a system currently at your home, what you should think about in terms of location and we won't talk about different types of piles, because in Haverford Township, you do need to have a closed bin system, but just things you should be thinking about with a closed bin system. What goes in there, the curing phase, and actually all the phases of composting. I'll go in a little bit to the science of what's happening in there. So cool. And then how you can apply that compost. And the biggest thing that we get questions on is issues. What am I going to run into? What should I be prepared for? And how can I handle it? So just a little language arts for us today. So compost and composting get used interchangeably. And as people talk about composting more and more, I feel like the confusion continues to be there. So composting is a verb used to describe the natural process of organic materials breaking down and becoming compost. It's also used, people will say, oh, I'm composting at home. And what they mean by that is they're redirecting their home and kitchen waste from their landfill trash and putting it into either a container in their backyard or some other vessel. So those are 2 different things that fall under the word composting. Compost is a noun that describes what comes out of that process, which is the nutrient rich. It's a soil amendment that helps do amazing things like sequester carbon, reduce pesticide use in your plants, reduce erosion, and a lot of other things that we'll get into. But compost is really a powerful vitamin, time release vitamin for your plants. So it can have a lot of benefits to applying back to your garden. And then the final thing, I share this every time, but I think it's amazing because composting has become, even in the past 2.5 years I've been doing it, it's gone from like, what are you talking about? To like, oh, I've heard about this. But it's not a new idea. Composting is the natural process. An apple falls from the tree, and if it's not eaten, it goes back into the ground. So, and people have been using composting to enhance their gardens, their yields, and their crop production forever. So there's a little fun fact about Mesopotamian and Akkadian Empire. There is a ton of writings and journalings from Thomas Jefferson and George Washington about the value in composting and their experiments in composting to help create better soil for their crops and their farms. So composting has been around for a very, very long time. But I'm excited to talk to you today about how you can implement it at home. The 5 major factors that you need to consider, and this is like really the most important things to think about when you're building your pile are volume. You need enough material to generate, to insulate and generate heat within your pile, which again, next point is temperature. You want to try to get the mix correct so that all of the reactions are happening in the pile and it's going to get to a heat that helps everything break down. If it stays cold, it will take a very long time to break down. Eventually it will, but it takes a really long time. And with food waste, that's usually a bad thing. Air, so all of these things, composting is an aerobic process. So you want all the materials in the pile to constantly have oxygen. Moisture, your pile should look wet, like it just rained all of the time. And then microorganisms, which are literally the entire part of this process is about creating an environment in which microorganisms can thrive. There's different types of microorganisms happening in the pile, but too little oxygen and certain ones will die off. Too much oxygen, it's very rare that there's too much oxygen in the process, but then everything will dry up and you'll need to water it. So the 5 things and I would argue there's probably one other thing, which is time. Composting takes time. It is not going to happen overnight. You will not get, all of your food scraps in there and then magically in 2 days you have soil. It does take time. So just have patience with the process. It is a worthy endeavor. And all right. So why compost? Talking about that worthy endeavor part. So save money. You can not, you're not going to spend money on chemical fertilizers for your garden. Saves resources because well, 2 things. You're saving money. Also, you're wasting a lot of food. The average person, they say we could just walk out of the grocery store and leave a bag in the parking lot. That's how much food we waste every week. So instead of wasting those food scraps that you spent your money on, you can use them to help feed your plants. Saves resources, both in the food waste and then also you're not transporting soil from place to place. Extends the life of our landfills. So residential waste, the waste that you and I create, roughly 40% of that is compostable. So we talked about that 22% that is just food waste. But in addition, cardboard, paper products, and we'll get into what goes into your system, but in general, about 40% of what we send to landfills could be composted, which means it could be turned into a reusable product, also saving a resource. Improve your soil. Adding beneficial microorganisms to your soil will improve the health of your soil. And healthy soil creates healthy plants, which once you eat it, creates a healthy human. So it's creating a circular system within your home that you will benefit from. And then reducing impact. So a lot of people, what happens in a landfill, we don't really think about it, but when materials go to a landfill, they seal, they'll leave it open for a day or 2, and then they seal everything with a layer of plastic and then a layer of dirt. This is obviously to mitigate pest and odor issues. But what that does is take oxygen out of the landfill environment. So anything that is biodegradable or compostable that ends up in a landfill, or food waste that is deprived of oxygen, is going to go through an anaerobic process in which oxygen is not present. So it will release methane gas as it breaks down. And methane is 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide, and is a very volatile gas that has to be pumped out, because if it gathers in areas with little to no air, it can spontaneously combust. Now, landfill fires are not like a very common thing because we do pipe the methane out, and there are projects to recapture the methane. However, a lot of it just gets released into the environment. So roughly 17% of what the US methane emission, which is a very hard thing to track, comes from our landfills. So if we took organics out of the landfill system, that would greatly reduce the amount of methane they're emitting. So these are all, composting at home can really simply allow you to do all of these things. And then again, this is just more information from a wonderful place called the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, but talking about on the left, why compost specifically is so beneficial for plant life and just the health of our soils. And then also really looking at what we're throwing away and how it could be repurposed into this thing called compost. So there are two sides to composting, as hopefully you're getting a clear picture of, but both are really, really important. And also, it's part of that impact thing that I was just mentioning. So I'll keep cruising. And then one thing I like to cover with everyone is commercial versus backyard composting. What's the difference? Because especially recently, you're starting to see a lot of compostable products come onto the market. You are not going to want to put most of them into your backyard system. If it's something that looks like cardboard and is grainy and it can be ripped up and it looks like paper, you can probably put it in your system. But any of these compostable plastic bags, you really can't, they're not meant for a backyard system. If it says it's good for backyard composting, I would still say that you could probably get away with one, but it can't be like you putting your trash bag out, day after day or week after week. Your backyard system is not going to get hot enough to break that down, and it will overwhelm it. In addition, no dairy or meat, anything with high fat content, no pet waste. You have to be a little more careful with what goes into your pile. Maintaining high temperatures is also more challenging in the backyard because you're just not going to have the volume. The windrows at the piles that we're talking about at Linvilla are sometimes 80 to 100 yards long. They are well over 10 feet high. There is a huge amount of volume and material insulated with brown material all over it. So it's just going to be able to break down a lot more. Any part of the pile that's in the active phase maintains a temperature of roughly 150 degrees over about 10 days. So they're almost completely different types of composting processes. But it's important as you're making the change to composting at home, I would still recommend staying away from compostable products. Don't kind of waste your money and get super excited about them because they're usually meant for a commercial composting environment. We can go into that in more detail later if you'd like, but I like to say that caveat because, it can get pretty exciting to get new stuff as you get going. And then the two types of backyard composting, again, I like to talk about at the beginning because right now, if you haven't gotten started yet, it's almost like working out. Like, what is your goal from this process? Are you looking to have finished compost that you can use in your garden in the spring? Are you looking to redirect waste? Are you looking to do both? What are your goals? That can help determine which one of these is right for you. There's kind of no wrong way to do this, but it will help your expectations greatly if you kind of understand what you're trying to accomplish. So batch processing is when you are getting the mix right, you're watering, you're turning daily during the high temperature times. You're strategically planning this, and you can get finished product in as little to 1 to 3 months. You're perhaps keeping a temperature log, so you know exactly what's happening. The as-you-go pile can take 3 to 8 months. This is when people are like, I don't know if I'm ever getting finished compost out of this. You're kind of just putting things in, you're covering it with ground, you're watering it when you remember, you're turning it when you remember, but you're more looking to just redirect your food waste. This will work, and eventually you will go into the bottom of that container and there will be finished compost in the bottom. It may not be what you expected, it may not be as much, but you can certainly use it in your garden and feel good about redirecting your waste. So, as you're going through this process and thinking about what you want to accomplish, if you're kind of like, what, I just want to do this, I want to redirect my waste, that's amazing. you don't have to get as crazy about stockpiling and things like that if that's the route you're going to take. If you are committed to having your finished compost ready come, April, then you are going to want to keep an eye. You're definitely going to want to stockpile things this fall and just have a plan and create a system for yourself for watering and monitoring your compost pile. So it's kind of like, what's your time commitment? What do you want to put into this to get, and what do you want to get out of it? So with that caveat said, are we ready to compost? Yay. Oh, I want to check the chat, but I feel like I'll get distracted. But does anyone have any questions right now that they want me to address before we get in here?
Gwen, I just want to add something in that you mentioned at the beginning that only enclosed systems were allowed in Haverford Township. So right now, the composting guide, or whatever the rules are called, are being reworked. And they haven't been passed as of yet by the commissioners, just because I don't think they've been presented to them. But in there, the draft does include options for more open composting. The concern, but that's more for like an advanced composter. Because if you don't get the mix right and everything, you could attract rodents and things like that. So so when we come to the where we talk about the bin, I'll talk about what to do to prevent rodents. And but I just wanted to add that in.
Right, and it's also about how much land how much space you have as well, how close your neighbors are. So Haverford Township is a large township. There's probably people with different situations, but that's good to know. Thank you, Joy. For now, I'll stick with what the rules say, but we'll stay tuned to hear what comes next.
Gwen, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was coughing and I muted myself and then I forgot to unmute. Okay, and I'm back. Sorry, guys. So step one, location. Isn't it the key to everything? So determine where your pile should go. Look around your backyard, survey it. I would recommend finding a place that's convenient, because the colder it gets, the less far I want to walk outside. And since you'll be having a closed bin system in Haverford Township, similar to what you see here, although much, much prettier, you will need to water it. So you will either need to remember to take the lid off when it rains or actively pour water on it, because it will dry out very quickly, especially in the summer when it's getting hot. They're all black, so they do get hot. You're going to want to put it in a partially shaded area if you have something that fits the bill. So if it can be near your hose or somewhere that you're not going to have to like troop out to, that's great. And yeah, partially shaded is preferable. Again, these are all like nice to have. It will still work, but you just need to be mindful if it's sitting, baking in the hot sun on a 90-degree day, that it's going to need more attention during that time period than it will when the weather's like this, 70, it's shade, it's been cloudy for 3 days. So you'll have to pay a little more attention to it, but definitely near a water source, so you don't have to like lug a jug of water out to the back corner of your yard if that's inconvenient. As I've found with anything, make it as easy as possible on yourself as you set up the process, so that you don't have things that you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. So step two, the two closed bin systems, the black one you see here is, again, a little similar. It's not the exact picture of what Havertown, I'll show you that soon. These are great. I have two of these. I like these a lot. They do help. You can just add materials to the top And as it turns into compost, it settles and gathers weight. So there are doors on the bottom to just scrape it right out. So you can kind of take your materials out as you go, which is lovely. It is a little challenging to aerate. So you have to kind of get in there with a shovel or a pitchfork, or there are cool aeration tools that you just spin in there and they sort of poke holes in the pile and create little aeration tubes. And they're like $10 to $20. So not an expensive piece of equipment, super easy. If you have back problems, strongly recommend. And then the tumbler, amazing for aeration because all you have to do is put the materials in there and turn them. We like to joke here that they tend to multiply because with the tumbler, you need to have a period of time where you're not adding new material to let the materials process, to let the heat build, and then sort of like you're baking a cake. You're not going to keep throwing ingredients in while it's in the oven. You got to give it a minute. Now, say it's just 2 people at home, you could freeze your scraps for a week and then kind of see if everything's broken down and dump it. Anything that's not broken down, put it back in the tumbler and start fresh and just leave, let the finished product sit on the ground for a little. It's not going to hurt anything. But what ends up happening for a lot of people is they just feel like they're turning it all the time and nothing's really happening because you're just commingling the new materials with the old materials. Again, that may be fine and you may be happy with that process. So it's really your choice. But you are required to have a closed bin system. And here is where we talk about, and this is the beautiful bin that Haverford Township has purchased to subsidize at $25, which I think normally these would be at least $75. And Joy, I don't know if you want to jump in, but again, we have the Have Compost email here. Just to talk a little bit more about the program and what's available to everybody.
Yeah, so when I mentioned that for critters, like this bin, and most of these upright bins are open on the bottom. Mm-hmm. So rodents can actually burrow in from the ground up into the compost bin. So in order to make it rodent resistant, I've pre-cut some galvanized steel mesh so you could obviously get it on your own. That's with 1/2-inch squares, and then you just kind of put it on the bottom, and this makes it rodent resistant. And so those are available with the bins. It's $3.50. So yeah. I have one of these at my house, and I just want to add that I do have 2 tumblers for my family. One for like new fresh material and one for, that it's processing. And then I also got an upright bin, this upright bin, and I really prefer the upright bins. I do turn it every day. Because I actually use it as a neighborhood compost bin. So I have a lot of people contributing to it. But I just kind of stir it with like a broom pole. And that works for me.
Yeah, that's great. The 2 tumblers, I continue to hear that about the multiple ones, but that's a great way also to segue into, there's a lot of tools that you probably already have at home that you can use to get going with the composting process and figure out what works for you. I use one of those smaller kind of hoe pitchforks, and it works great just getting in the corners. But these are a little more rounded than the one I have. So awesome. And yes, putting steel mesh in the bottom, because it is an open bottom, will help peace of mind function and also keep any interested, especially in the winter. If you've got heat going, you may get some interest from furry friends. Step 3. So you got this amazing bin. Maybe you got your steel mesh, you're setting it up. What next? So you found the perfect location, you got your tools ready. So first would be to put down some soil or some compost just to start the process, put a nice foundation in. Keeping brown materials handy, right? So in the next couple of weeks, all these leaves are going to fall. We're all going to have leaves all over our yards, and we're going to bag them. We're going to either send them to get composted or, leave them on your lawn if you're like me and you just don't care. But they are amazing because in the spring and summer, brown material can be harder to find. Leaves are so good for the composting process. They break up easily. They're a great carbon-rich material. So I would recommend holding back a bag or two, and you can store them however you'd like. But if you can stockpile them in the fall, it will serve you well come winter and spring and summer. Watering may be crucial, which we did talk about that. Materials should have the same moisture content as a wrung out sponge. Dry materials, it will slow or stop decomposition. So watering is really critical, especially when it's warm outside. Tools recommended: pitchfork, garden hose. We talked about the aerator, a thermometer. Again, if you're doing batch processing, if you're really interested in making this sort of a science experiment, thermometers are great because you kind of know exactly what's going on and what phase you're in. Otherwise, you're just kind of looking at it and guessing. The other thing with home composting is like a commercial pile, you'll go and they're steaming. They're steaming in the winter. There could be snow on it at the beginning of the day and it will melt. But home composting, the heat, it could raise in heat and then it could, happen over a 5-hour period. You're not always there to witness it because it can be such a short span of time that a thermometer can help you understand if it had gotten hot or if it's cooling off or what's happening. But again, a sifter may also be helpful for finished products. It's not on here, but again, they're really inexpensive. You can make one with a screen. But that's if you're using it in your garden and you just want to sift out, sometimes things don't break down. They need to go through another cycle. So that can be beneficial as well. What should go in? So this is obviously everyone's biggest, what should I be including in my compost? So you'll hear, if you Google composting, green and brown. Green materials mean nitrogen-rich materials. And by and large, this is the material that you're going to generate in your kitchen. So fruits, vegetables, I'll go into the beware of lawn and flower clippings, coffee grounds, tea bags, meat and seafood you see crossed out. Those things are compostable, but you do not want to put them in your backyard system. Along with anything with a high fat content. So if you cooked your vegetables in olive oil, sauteed them, it sounds delicious, but your compost pile may struggle to break those down. Baked goods, breads, all those things can really overwhelm your system. It depends. For the breads, like you could break things up really small, but for the most part, you want to put fruits, vegetables, lawn and flower clippings. If they're dried, then they've become a brown material, and now they have converted themselves to a carbon-rich material. So the same, like if it's a leaf that just fell off, like you pulled it off, it's nitrogen-rich. If it's brown, it's carbon-rich. So the brown materials you see listed here. Eggshells are considered a brown material because they are carbon-rich. I would say some people like to grind them up a little bit. Again, it depends on how high the heats are in your pile, whether or not your eggshells are going to break down or not. Fireplace ashes are considered carbon-rich material, but you want to add these. It can only be wood. Don't ever add charcoal ash. And two, you want to add them sparingly. So you can kind of work them in over time once they've cooled off throughout the winter. But this is usually where people get the most concerned about what can I put in and what can I put in. And I would say you're going to need to experiment a little bit with what works in your pile. Every single person's composting pile environment is different. Even though it's going through the same process, it's going through them in different over different time periods. So you are going to have to kind of feel it out a little bit, what works for you. Beware of citrus. Citrus is just highly acidic. So compost is about creating this balanced pH environment, and citrus can really throw it off. So if you're someone who loves citrus and constantly has, orange peels and pineapple and all these amazing fruits that sound delicious right now, you may need to just sparingly add it and make sure it's breaking down before you kind of go whole hog. It's easy to overwhelm a backyard system with so much of one thing, because actually compost systems tend to love diversity. They love lots of different types of materials, because usually then they can achieve a balanced pH. And then weeds in a backyard system, I would not recommend putting them in at all, because you really have to maintain a high temperature in order to burn off the weed pathogens. And what is more likely is that they don't fully decompose. And then when you spread your compost, you're also spreading weed seeds into your garden, which I'm sure nobody wants to do. And then tea bags. A lot of tea bags, weirdly, are made of partial plastic. Which, like, why would I want to do something hot full of plastic? But there are a lot of different tea bags out there made with different materials. So if you're putting your tea bags in, they're not breaking down, I would definitely check what they're made of. Also, staples can't go. So if there's a staple in it, that's not going to go through the process, and you will find that at the end of the process. So this hopefully gives you a high level. Pet waste, any kind of waste, absolutely do not put in your backyard system. It's going to create odors. It's going to create interest from furry friends. So steer clear of all of that for your backyard composting experiment. When you're adding materials, you can see in the photo here, like a broccoli stalk. If you're not going to use that for soup and you're going to compost that, you want to chop that up. Anything that's larger, you want to break into smaller bites, because it's easier for the microbes to break it down if it's smaller. They also I've heard this cool fact that it's because the microbes, it gives you more surfaces for them to go on. So if it's just one stalk, there's only a limited amount of surfaces. But if you break it up this way, then you've created all these new surfaces for the microbes. So it does help a lot to break up your materials. So if you throw like a moldy orange in there, it may be in there for a really long time. But if you break it up, it will help things go faster. The carbon nitrogen ratio. So carbon is that brown material, nitrogen is that green material. So if you're just kind of slow playing it, you're going to want to put a little more brown material in than nitrogen. I would say 3 parts brown to 1 part green. So if you're using, a bowl or a bin like you see in this photo, take it out, dump it in, and then just grab, handfuls of the leaves. 1, 2, 3, done. If you're really maintaining hot temperatures, you probably don't need as much carbon in your pile environment, but there's almost nothing that can go wrong if you put too much carbon into your compost environment. That you may need to add additional water, but other than that, that's not a bad thing. Too much nitrogen is really where people get into trouble. We've had a lot of people contact us and say, like, I don't know what's happening. And we basically figure out that they've only added food waste to their composting system. That is an absolute recipe for smells, mold, fungus, like all kinds of things. So too much carbon can be navigated very easily. Too much nitrogen is going to bring you some headaches. So if you're not sure, err on the side of a little extra carbon, especially if it's leaves. They're so great. So that would be my pro tip, as it were. And then just make sure as you walk away that everything's covered. So if you add these new materials, you are going to want to turn it around a little bit. So you could do like 2 parts 1 part nitrogen, 2 parts carbon, turn it, and then add an extra layer of carbon just to cover everything. But you want to make sure that any food scraps are well buried when you put the lid back on there, because that again helps keep pest interest at a minimum. And then turn, baby, turn. So the way that we get the temperatures rising is by adding oxygen to the pile. So if you're adding materials daily, as Joy mentioned, turning daily is a great rule of thumb, especially now when the temperatures are in our favor. As it gets cold, you don't want to turn it all the time because it's, the chemical reactions are heating everything up. And if you spin it, you're going to break things apart a little bit. And then when it's below freezing, don't turn it. Your pile is going to basically go dormant at that point, and just continue to insulate it with carbon materials. And, I would just let it build up. As soon as the weather warms back up, everything will start moving in the right direction. And then the mix will affect how fast everything breaks down. So, it really just depends on the environment that you've created during building the pile. So don't get too stressed about the length of time it's taking. Everything is different. Everyone is different. Every pile is different. So just, be patient. I just want to geek out a little bit about what's happening in there. So there are kind of 3 phases of composting. Excuse the cartoon, but we're having some fun tonight. So initiation phase, they call it the mesophilic phase, and it's when the temperatures are on the rise. This is the bacteria are most active during this phase. They're breaking down all the sugars and starches. They're turning the cellulose into glucose, and they're causing the temperatures to come up. I say this acetomycetes, but I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. I think it's actomycetes. I can't even pronounce this word. And I have literally had Google announce it to me like 1,700 times. But they are what comes in during the thermophilic stage, and then fungi come in. So these are the 3 types of microorganisms, by and large, that come in during the composting process. And then in the thermophilic phase, which is when you start to see those high temperatures, I have my cheat sheets here. Mesophilic, the bacteria go dormant. The actomycetes, I don't know why I can say it. They produce antibiotics, and then they begin to degrade like the complex carbs and proteins that are in the pile. The fungi also further degrade all of those, and then they break down materials that are too dry, acidic, or low in nitrogen for bacterial activities. And then after the thermophilic phase, so that's that active composting phase, that's when you're starting to see temperatures or steam or spike, a spike coming out of your pile. And again, depending on your pile, that could last a couple hours. For a commercial pile, that's going to last 10 to 14 days. Then everything's going to settle. And it's similar to this in that the initiation phase, you're building up the volume, and then your pile, as it generates enough volume and then the core generates enough heat, that's when it moves into the thermophilic phase. Then the maturation phase, really having trouble with pronunciation tonight, guys, and I apologize for that. I'm going to work on this next time. That is what they call the curing process, which is critical during commercial composting because there's been a ton of activity in the pile. A little less important during the backyard composting phase because, again, you're not having that extended period of thermophilic activity. But we're going to talk about it anyway. So this is called compost curing. It's the final stage of the process. It's when the chemical reactions cease and the compost stabilizes. The bacteria comes back into the pile. The fungi finish the protein breakdown. The arthropods come in to support the microbes. So things start to come back in once they've been driven away by the heat. And those are the organisms that are going to benefit your soil environment once you apply them to your garden. again, most commercial operations, once the active composting is complete, they're going to allow at least 3 months for all of those things to settle and the microorganisms to kind of come back into the process before they start applying it onto their land. For an at-home system, if it's brown and crumbly, if it has no odor to it, and it looks like fertilizer or soil, it's essentially cured. The reason in commercial they do tests for this and pay close attention to it is that it can be too strong if it's applied to plants too early. So they do just let it, but it's just a matter of letting it sit. There's nothing to do. It's just allowing the process to complete. Compost is finished. Now what? So how and when to apply compost? There's a lot of different compost applications. Spring planting obviously is when it's most popular. People are getting their vegetables in the ground. They're excited for spring. In the summer, it can be great to just side dress and put a little compost around an existing plant. Compost, again, acts like a time-release vitamin. So it's going to slowly put the nutrients into the ground versus a fertilizer that is going to just kind of just supercharge the plant, but it's not going to consistently help it over time. We like to say compost feeds the soil, fertilizer feeds the plant. So it's better to feed the soil because that creates a beneficial environment for the microorganisms that help the plant with growth and resisting disease, versus fertilizers, which just help the plant grow but aren't benefiting the soil environment. Typical application, 2 to 3 inches, if you're looking for like a true soil amendment. But a lot of times, like a side dressing, 1 inch, you need a lot less than you think. And really all plants benefit from it. Lawns benefit from compost application, trees, house plants, seedlings can be planted right into compost. So compost has a ton of benefits and applications in your garden, or your house plants if you'd like. And really you can use as much or as little as you want. We'd say at least 1 inch, but 2 to 3 inches is very healthy. Pile problems. So these are the things that most people say, like, I'm not doing this. Pile stinks. So that is normally, as I said earlier, due to too much nitrogen. So you put too much kitchen waste and not enough carbon into the pile. We would recommend adding more brown materials. Do not water it. If it looks wet, if things are sticking together, don't add water, add brown materials and turn it a lot, because you may have created an anaerobic environment. So you need to break that up with oxygen. Pile isn't doing anything and materials are just sitting there. This is common, again, as we spoke about earlier, during the winter months, because it's below freezing and things aren't in our favor here. So I wouldn't recommend this during winter if that's what's happening, but any other time, if everything's just sitting there and you keep opening it and the level's not really going down, it probably needs water. So just add water, turn it, cover it with browns. And when you get it right, you will open it one day and it will have dropped a solid 4 or 5 inches. It can be that dramatic once you give the pile what it needs. Lots of bugs. So worms are good. You're going to see bugs. Ants can come. Usually don't get concerned about it unless there's like a true invasion of ants, which is not common. Tiny flies, especially in here, like corn cobs, there's certain waste that do attract flies. So again, make sure you're covering things with a layer of brown material. And just do not add any meat, seafood. Some people, if you're an experienced composter, there may be some caveats to that rule, but if you're just starting out, stay away from that stuff. Fresh corn cobs do draw houseflies, so bury them very, very well. And again, the meat and the pet waste, all these things are compostable, but you do not want to put them in your backyard system. As you grow into an experienced composter, you may want to put shrimp tails in there because they can be great for compost. But again, just stay very clear of that as you're getting started. Never getting finished product out of the pile. I talked about this earlier as well. It does happen a lot if you're using a tumbler. If you're just never giving it time to settle. And the other, if you're not creating the environment, like if you've gotten to the top of that black bin and there has been no settling at any point, I would recommend adding water and turning it and just leaving it be and freezing your scraps for a little bit and waiting and seeing what happens. But again, composting, it really is like your own personal science experiment at home. You're going to eat different materials that I'm going to eat, which we tend to all eat the same things over and over again. So your pile is going to experience the same foods over and over again, unless you're eating seasonally. So you'll start to get a feel for what works and what doesn't. Just pay attention as much as you can, and that will help usually mitigate most, if not all, issues. And so you're kind of making lasagna, right? We're starting with our wire mesh, then a layer of soil, maybe some sticks or some woody material, brown, green, brown, green, brown. So just keep layering it like that, and you will be good. And that, I think, is the end of our show. So I'm going to jump in the chat and see what questions I can answer for everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time today. And is there anything?
I'm just going to add, I have a composting book here, and like as far as bugs and stuff, they are part of the process. The microorganisms, but also like the kind of freaky centipedes and stuff like that. So if you are completely do not want to see bugs, composting is probably not going to be your thing. But if bugs have their own place, I'm fine with them outside, just not near my bed or inside, really.
Yes, that is very fair. There will be bugs, but just try not to pay too close of attention to it. And you have to see like so many to get overwhelmed, which I have seen, but for the most part, they're the bugs that are in your backyard right now and you don't know it, and it's fine. But yes, if you hate bugs, like my daughter, maybe composting isn't for you. And then you can call Mother Compost. We'll come take it for you. Sorry, shameless plug. So we can add compost or compost if we don't have a lot of garden areas. Cora, yes, absolutely. Composting or compost is a soil amendment. It can help your current soil. It can help your lawn. You can add it just about anywhere. So yes, it can greatly benefit your soil. And if you are planting even small plants, oh, sorry, Joy, you already answered that. Did you answer everything, Joy? Do I need to go into?
Pretty much, except for Cora's last comment, which I think is why some of us were confused by your response. Can you go to her last comment?
No sound. Where's Cora's last? Branching from different sizes. Do we need to break up smaller pieces?
The question is, do we have to worry about the Haverford Township bins catching fire, or just place away from home, shed, neighbor's wood pile?
Oh, sorry. It's the combustion in a home composting system is usually not a thing. I would not be overly concerned or concerned at all with it. Almost no one ever achieves those temperatures. It is something that we have to monitor really closely at a larger commercial facility, but I would not be concerned about it catching fire at all. So I would place it away.
Also had a question.
Sorry.
Cora also had a question about adding mushrooms, like from the yard to the compost bin. I was thinking that might spread the fungus because of the spores. I looked in the Rodale book, it didn't say anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like, you kind of have to figure out what kind of mushroom you're dealing with and what kind of, you know, because I put mushrooms that I eat in there, like leftover mushrooms, but I wouldn't probably put anything that's growing wild in my yard in there. It would really just depend on what kind of heat you're achieving and what you think you can burn off if it's a pathogen. But again, if it doesn't decompose completely, you're putting that in your soil that you're going to spread on your garden. So if that's a mushroom that you don't want to see on your lawn or garden, I wouldn't recommend putting it back into your backyard composting bin. And Stephanie, I saw you mentioned the same, like due to possible smell, recommended distance from neighbors' homes. There really should not be an odor if you've got it right. There is not like a noticeable smell to composting when you have the mix correct. So if you are smelling something that you're like, whoa, I would say add carbon and don't add any nitrogen material, but you really shouldn't. I mean, and at the end of the day, you have your trash bins sitting outside right now, most likely. So they're going to create an odor in the summer. I know that's not a hard and fast answer, but I would say, like, I wouldn't put it so close to your house that it's right next to your door. I would put it some, you know, at least a couple feet away, but still convenient for you. Other than that, it's kind of a judgment call. I don't know, Joy, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I would say you would notice it smelling before your neighbors, because you would open it up to put something in it and it would start to stink, and you just add more leaves to it or the browns. So I don't think I don't think it's much to be concerned about.
Yeah. Yeah, your compost pile will be okay, especially at 7 to 8 days. If you're on vacation, you're not going to be adding new materials to it. So I would water it before you go away. The other option, especially if you're not adding materials, is you can leave. I guess you can't leave the lid open in case it rains. But yes, nothing will happen. It just may slow down or stop decomposition for that time period. So you may have to do a little more work when you get back to get it going. Did I get everything?
I'd like to add that in my tumblers, when I've come back from vacation, I'm pleasantly surprised that it looks really great.
Yeah, sometimes it's like it needs you to just back away and let it do its thing. So it's not, I don't find that, like, composting doesn't have to be a chore, and it doesn't have to be something, you know, that becomes labor intensive. You're sort of just setting the stage and letting the microbes do the work, and sometimes they do their work better without our interference.
I'd like to just add something. So because I've been composting with my family for about over 10 years in the tumblers, and then this year going and, you know, I have this neighborhood bin, and I would, if people are interested and have a, you know, a proper, like, out of the way place that neighbors can get to, so they can also add to your bin, I would highly suggest it. Many times I go to my neighborhood bin and it is steaming, because the amount of material that's being added there is so much greater than what my family could add to it. So just like the industrial, it's because they have a lot of material that's decomposing at the same time. So if you want a lot of compost, because you'll be surprised, even though you'll add a lot to it, you won't end up with that much compost in the end. So if you want a lot of compost, invite your neighbors to contribute. And what I do for my neighborhood bin, and I should probably have done for my personal bin, is right next to the bin, I have like kind of that plastic fencing, and I have a huge pile of shredded leaves. And I have a bucket in there, like, you know, like literally a sand pail bucket, and a scoop. And so whenever somebody adds their food waste, then they get the bucket and just add the leaves on top. And then I do the mixing because I like to see what's going on and everything. So but that is like the super easy way. And I shred all my leaves in the fall. I think I put it in the
You have a shredder, right?
yeah, I have an electric shredder because I don't mow my own lawn. So like mowing over it with a lawnmower is the easiest way to go.
Right.
But that was just not, we were having to resurrect our lawnmower each year, and that was a chore. So I bought this this leaf shredder, which basically is a weed whacker in a bin. So you could also just put your weed whacker in a
Trash
in a
can.
bin of leaves, and it'll probably do the same thing, but it's a flow through device. And I fill up two like 35-gallon trash cans for my family for the year. And that's enough leaves, shredded leaves for me or my family. This year I had to get a lot more for the neighborhood bin. And then also I like get everybody on so many leaves from the neighborhood, and I shred my leaves to make mulch, because it will be there in the spring. You won't have to mulch.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the next fall, you know, it's a lot of the bottom of it's decomposed, and then you add more.
Sounds like quite an operation you've got there, Joy. I want to come check some of that out.
Yeah,
like
it's a
the
lot of
mulching.
shredding.
Yeah, well, you know, that's awesome though. And it's interesting because it also, piles love diversity. So that's the other challenge that humans tend to like the same, well, maybe I'm just boring, but we tend to like the same thing you know, these are the things we eat, and we eat the same thing over and over. And compost piles, the microorganisms, they like different stuff. So when you have different people contributing who have different diets, it does, you know, elevate the action in the pile as well. The same thing happens at commercial. It's just so many different materials. Cindy, what happens if you don't shred the leaves? In terms of, Cindy, are you asking like if you don't shred them when you put them in the bin? Nothing. You can just put the leaves in the bin, especially dry brown leaves. They will break down. Shredding them, it's just, as we said, like if you make things smaller, it's easier for the imagine these tiny little microorganisms, these tiny little mouths. So it makes it easier for them to like digest quicker. They will still get to it, so it's not, you don't have to. I would say if you're putting in like a cardboard box, you need to shred it up. There's no way for them to, you know, those things will take forever to break down. And then on your lawn, if you're not going to rake up the leaves and you just want to run a mower over them, if you leave the leaves and then they get wet, they can just, you know, kill your grass, or they don't really kill your grass, but they don't make your lawn look nice. Brown materials, be mindful how thick those are. You know, a lot of pine cones, I would just kind of, I would go slow with them. I would break them down a little bit, and then I would see how the pile reacts to them. There are cool charts you can find online that actually tell you the specific pH of everything. So say you were adding like a lot of pine cones during certain season when they're falling all over your yard, you could kind of get a good idea of what else you're adding and sort of try to get that pH balance right. If you really want to kind of dig into it, my recommendation, because sometimes I can be pretty lazy about my composting, is just like I try a little, see how it goes. And then if it's not working, I don't put them more, you know, nothing's going to happen if you leave a pine cone in a bag for a little bit. But I wouldn't, you know, take 3 buckets of pine cones and throw them into the environment and expect them to break down super quickly. So again, I would leave that to you, Stephanie, how you want to manage the pile. But typically I would say you have some home craft projects for the summer, for the winter, they're also lovely for that too. But maybe just start with a couple and see Yes, oh gosh, there's amazing charts, and it's quite a wormhole, but I love it. So yes, you can look up that chart and then kind of plan accordingly when you're adding more of those into the mix.
I'd like to go back to the shredding leaves. There's two other reasons why I shred leaves. One is you might not end up with a really great end result that looks like dirt, and that's okay. But it's easier to spread that if the leaves are shredded up. And then also it takes a lot less space to store the leaves if they're shredded.
That is an excellent point.
Oh, I do want to add one thing. So we have a compost, what do you call it? Google group. And so I'll put the email in the Have Compost. I think it's called Haverford Compost or Have Compost Google group, but I can, if you can't find it, you can just email and I can add you to it. And through that, some people don't bother with leaves at all for their brown material. They get wood shavings. And there's a cabinet maker in Philadelphia that always has wood shavings, and that's for, not treated wood. And we have a couple people who go down and get huge bags of this wood to add. And so if you want to go that way and not bother with the leaves, that's also a great option. So I can get you hooked up. If you want to kind of do it on your own, they usually advertise on Craigslist for free wood shavings or something for compost.
Another great suggestion. Shredded mail, Cindy. I would be very careful. Yes, shredded mail is fine, but make sure there's nothing glossy. It has to be real paper, no additives, no glues, no stickers, no staples, no plastic. So yes, shredded paper can work, but just make sure it doesn't have anything else on it. So like the junk mail that comes in, a lot of that's got to be recycled. But, all right, well, it's 8:11, so it's been about an hour. So thank you, Joy and Haverford Township, Eileen, for hosting, and it was a pleasure to be with you today. Again, if you ever have composting questions, Joy's got the havecompost@gmail. And Mother Compost is available as well. If your home composting experiment isn't going well, we can help diagnose issues or help you turn it around. So thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. It was great to see everybody. It's so fun to talk composting. So I hope you have a great night, and cheers. Happy Wednesday.
Thank you, Gwen. And it definitely consider, like, if the backyard compost you don't think is your thing, Gwen's company, Mother Compost, is one of two servicers for Haverford Township, and we really like that she's doing it.
Thanks, guys. All right, thank you, Joy. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye-bye.